claim freedom. It's a reassertion of liberties which they believed that they had enjoyed from time immemorial.
Yeah.
So the important point, I think, is that the whole idea of liberation is essentially implausible. And it's implausible, I think, because Marxism and most forms of communism are really designed for a relatively unsophisticated set of people, and a set of people who obviously are not familiar with what you might call sophisticated Western political thought.
Well, how is it that Marxism, in fact, continues to appeal to a number of highly educated people, or are there subtle transformations in its meaning as they espouse it? Are they using it really as a metaphor?
No, I don't think they're using it as a metaphor. The question of its appeal is extremely complicated. You see, Marxism and all other doctrines, I think, are essentially forms of revolutionary praxis. They want to they respond, amongst other things, to a passion for change.
Yeah.
So that anybody who feels in any way discontented with life in the modern world, and you might well say the human condition is full of discontents, may in principle be mobilized by whatever purports to theorize your discontent.
Whatever galvanizes it.
Exactly.
Liberation theology would be another example, wouldn't it?
Well, liberation theology is the conversion of religious ideas into ideology with a sort of light theological gloss. But again, the liberation idea is, of course, the key to all of this, I think.
Well, it's an attempt to really baptize Marx, isn't it, in a sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
However, your book maintains that whatever form it takes, its essential profile doesn't change. I.e., it is redemptive, it is comprehensive, it stresses liberation, unoppressed class, unoppressed class. How would feminism, for instance, be described by your reckonings?
Well, feminism is the discovery that women have made at the present epoch that they have always been an oppressed class.
Yeah.
And it is simply the application of the ideological line of argument to the condition of women. Now, the ideological line of argument is a set of moves which always arrive at an absolutely prefabricated standardized conclusion, namely that something that you have previously thought was perhaps a free and equal relationship is actually a disguised form of domination. That judges, lawyers, husbands, whites, industrial firms, employers, priests, whatever is analyzed in ideological terms is converted into the discovery. The discovery that's always made as the result of ideological criticism is that domination has happened. It's a bit like King Midas, you know, the king who everything he touched, he turned to gold with rather fatal results. Whatever an ideologist touches, he discovers to be dominatory.
Yes, as a matter of fact, on this program about 10 years ago, Bernadette Devlin was struggling with a cigarette, so I reached over and lit it. and she said, "Oh, thank you." And she was obviously mortified at having thanked me, because after the program was over, she said, "That was the most disgusting act of male aggression I've ever seen." And so I've had one vivid experience with it. Well, there's a sense in which calling a chairman a chairperson is supposed to liberate, isn't it? By the terminology.
Yes, it liberates by the terminology, but there another important point about ideology is involved, and that is that the minds of human beings reflect their circumstances. And if you use the word chairman, you are reinforcing this dominatory situation. But if you change the language, then this will be reflected, clickety-click, in the minds of people.
Consciousness heightening, right?
Exactly. It's part of the engineering of consciousness, so that ultimately all the media of consciousness, like language and what you see and what you experience, will reflect the ideal condition of things.
Well, it's one of the points that you make in your book that a false claim of ideologists is that genuine consciousness is enhanced by running it through an ideological strainer, correct? Your point being that actually it's diminished because it's a conscript consciousness, isn't it?
Well, what is meant in feminist terms, by raising consciousness, is accepting the abstract theory of feminism.
Yeah.
And the very move from theory to consciousness reveals the perceptual theory of knowledge involved in ideology, because the essential idea is that you open your eyes, clarified by ideology, and you see reality as it is. Similarly, proletarian consciousness is what the proletarian ought to see. Now, no proletarian has ever seen quite what Marx, a highly educated, philosophically inclined descendant of rabbis, ever saw, but Marx thought that he had worked out what was the proper consciousness for a proletarian. The word consciousness, you see, what one needs in order to understand ideology is an attention very specifically to the types of words they use. I was walking through New York yesterday, and there's a poster on the wall. I made it. I made it, and a poster claiming that Reagan and Mondale are agents of capitalism and so on. At the top of this poster were the simple words, "the truth." Now, it's that kind of claim to sheer transparency which is one of the charming secrets of ideology, and one of the reasons why it's extremely popular.
Well, as I understand it, consciousness used by ideologists is equated with an objectification of what it is that's being seen.
Yes.
So that a chairperson, or the use of the word chairman would be an objectification of man's efforts to subjugate women.
Exactly.
Now, given that you have the difficulty of seeking simultaneously to be scientific, they run into the same difficulty there, do they not? I.e., that objectification is ultimately a hallucination.
Ah, no. The theory of science that's involved, to the extent that they claim to be scientific, is a kind of Baconian theory of science, which is that you understand the world by looking at it. And ultimately it's perceptual. It's a form of empiricism. The problem is that from the time when class-divided societies arose, then dominatory ideas also arose. And dominatory ideas were words like heaven, God, priest, king, authority, the entire vocabulary of law, religion, philosophy, etc. And these ideas came between the human mind and nature and man. And it's the removal of these ideas. This is the original ideology. See, there's a fish, I gather, called a stickleback, which characteristically is set upon by a parasite which works its way through the fish and lodges in the eye. And the stickleback's vision, if I have my zoology right, is systematically distorted by the presence of this parasite in the eyeball. And Marx, using the analogy of a camera oscura, suggests pretty much the same thing. And the point of an ideology, it's a bit like psychoanalysis, you see. Raising consciousness means removing these ideas which are inadequately founded in a reality which you can perceive. And once you remove these ideas, then the truth is visible to you. So I do not think you can overemphasize the extent in ideologies to which its knowledge is based on perception.
Well, it's based on an ideologized perception, right? You are certainly not allowed to perceive that which is heretical.
Of course. What you perceive always is domination. The point is that in the societies in which ideology is likely to be cultivated, the essence of them is domination. And therefore you will understand that even when a charming chairman lights your cigarette for you, this is actually an act of domination. Now, that anecdote that you told is extremely revelatory of what seems to me to be the essence of ideology. It is a fundamentalism which is which masquerades as realism, you see, because one of the characteristic remarks of an ideologist is something like, it would be naive to believe that this, that, or the other. And naivete, the concept of naivete, is a highly technical expression in ideology, which means accepting the justifications of the oppressive society in their own terms.
That's right. St. Thomas would be naive by the standards of Marxist ideologists.
Very.
Yeah. Well, now, tell me how ideology is used in race relations. We've discussed feminism. Is an example of ideology the notion, say, that all of the difficulties suffered by Indians are the result of their having been colonized by whites or blacks or whatever?
That's the theory of imperialism, and there are various theories of racism which would attribute all the sufferings of blacks to what whites have done to them.
Mm-hmm.
There are many versions with different races coming up on top.
But they're all ideological in character.
Well, to be ideological in character is to construe oppressors and oppressed. Whenever that happens, whenever you have a theory that the things that people suffer from are the results of an entire system, then you have an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
You see, there is no doubt that people do inflict all sorts of grievous harm upon each other, and therefore one has to distinguish between a real case that such and such a set of people have been extremely unjustly treated by another set of people, and there's no doubt that this happens, from the ideological claim which theorizes the whole thing in terms of a system.
Well, there, intelligent, non-ideological observers have to make the distinction, right? There is no doubt for those who have read or seen, say, a passage to India, that that particular colony of whites were oppressive in their behavior and disdainful in their views of the people who were colonizing. On the other hand, you wouldn't say as much about Mother Teresa acting in a different context in the same country.
Mother Teresa could hardly be said to be oppressive. No, I don't know.
But she would be. What she would be, would she not, by the true ideologist, in the sense that she is sowing a belief in a system that plays into the hands of religious oppressors, no?
Yes, I suppose she would, because the characteristic of an ideology is that everything must be theorized.
There can't be an innocent party.
I'm not altogether sure that the British in India under the Raj are entirely oppressive. I mean, they may have been a rather boring, disdainful, contemptuous lot in their relations with the Indians. On the other hand, they operated in terms of civil law.
Oh yeah, and India was a much more pleasant place to live after the English got there than it was before. I mean,
it might well be argued that way, yes, certainly. I think it's plausible to say so.
It would be hard to argue the opposite, certainly, given the situation there in the early part of the 19th century. Well, now, okay, what about the use of ideology in the academy? Is the notion of academic freedom, as commonly enunciated, ideological, or is it exactly the opposite of ideological?
Well, from an ideologist's point of view, academic freedom is simply part of the structure of capitalist society. You see, in capitalist society, you have universities performing the knowledge-gathering and conceptualizing functions which will serve for the reproduction of knowledge of the system. So academic freedom is simply another of those things that conduces to the dominatory system. Hence, the ideologist in the universities regards himself as above all critical, because what he's doing is exposing that. On the other hand, see, ideologists in universities are in a difficult position in that nearly all of them are, in one degree or another, perfectly academic. That is, they understand what the academic rules of the game are. On the other hand,
scientific method
and so on. On the other hand, they tend to regard, for example, the division of academic inquiry into disciplines as being a version of the oppressor's tactic of divide and rule. You see, economics is cut off from sociology, and you get abstract axiological theories of rational agents choosing and responding to prices and so on. Sociology is to some extent studying the irrationalities of people in relation to class and status and so on. A Marxist ideologist, for example, would think that his Marxism is superior to both because it puts them together into a single system and theorizes the whole system. But of course, the